Greetings once again, my friends, and welcome back to Drak Reviews, where I'm taking on a game that, I have to be frank here, I would not have known about if not for the Shadow Blazer, and that is A Hat in Time, done by Gears for Breakfast. And so let's go ahead and get things started with the story. The story follows a young girl that has been affectionately named Hat Kid, as she's on her way home, probably to meet with her parents. We're not quite sure. And she's just barely checking her fuel to make sure that her ship can make the journey, when all of a sudden she gets an accidental visit from the Mafia. I'm not sure how, because it's the vacuum of space, but an accident occurs, as one happens with the Mafia, and all of the timepieces, which are the fuel source for the ship, have now fallen out onto the nearby planet, and it's now up to Hat Kid to collect them all back so that she can resume her trip home. With that, you start things off in Mafia Town, where you're able to meet Little Mustache Girl. I'm not calling her I have way more fun calling her Little Mustache Girl. As she tries to take on the Mafia, as well as help you out with the timepieces until she figures out, what those timepieces can do. And in the right hands, the timepieces are just a fuel source. That's what they're supposed to do. In the wrong hands, if you break a timepiece, you can create little pockets in time that start messing around with the surrounding area. And so it's up to you as Hat Kid to make sure that nobody abuses these things and also ensure your way home. With this, I've got to admit, I do like the story. I especially love the concept that each world has its own unique story. I just explained Mafia Town. I didn't necessarily explain the other worlds that I came across, and each of them have their own unique story to tell. So I didn't necessarily fault too much with the premise of this game, but there were a couple of problems here and there in some of the worlds that made me kind of twitch my head a little bit. Because of the fact that this is the main audience that this is trying to cater to is that it's supposed to be a cute and cuddly platformer. And yes, it has a bunch of dark themes, and yes, they're absolutely adorable to see somebody go through. The characters themselves have little quirks, little flaws that I definitely think could have been polished out. But again, it's a first entry, so I did take some points off for story, but only because I can see the rough edges of a first entry, and therefore I know that that's one thing that needs to be improved. Moving on into the visuals. Visuals for this are stunning. I will actually say that. So a lot of this game feels like it's inspired by or either done in cell shading. And the cell shading really did help what this game was trying to do, especially with the cuteness of Hat Kid, as well as Mustache Girl and a few other characters that you will come across in the journey. But with that, you can tell that this is a game that is like a first entry for this team, and you could already see just little things here and there that are off about the characters. Either the shadows are off, they're not necessarily moving their lip flaps properly, and this is one of those things that I know this game could have properly done. Little quirks like that. Also, little visual elements that could have been highlighted a little bit better. People might have actually noticed that when me and the Shadow Blazer played it in December, we got stuck pretty early on, and I actually came back to that level and realized that the solution was so dang easy, but it wasn't necessarily put out the best way possible. So at that point, and the problem wasn't the gameplay, it was the visual cues that the game didn't give in this case to help us get further. So I did take some points off for the visuals, just because while it does look good, there are some things off about it that could be fixed. Moving on into the gameplay. The gameplay is, in my opinion, where a lot of this game suffers, and while it is good, it is a collectathon platformer, there are some quirks that could have been fixed in the long run. The first thing that I'm actually going to bring up, and this is a little bit of a gripe, but I think it's a big enough gripe when you're making a platformer that it needs to be addressed, which is, like with most platformers, I'm going to compare it to Mario, at least from a gameplay perspective. You know that Mario can jump 3 times, and each time he does a successive jump that gets higher and higher. And in other collectathon platformers, like, say, Yooka-Laylee or Banjo-Kazooie, you know that if you will get like a double jump, and then eventually you'll get some kind of additional glide or a fly or something like that that will help you out. Hat in Time has that, but it's not clearly outlined how to do it, and it actually kind of hurts the flow of the control scheme a little bit. Naturally, Hat Kid can do a double jump, but the third jump, which is supposed to be like a I don't know how to else to explain it other than a slide to home base. She can do the slide in the air, but not only do you have to press a different button, so you go from pressing, in my case when I played the PlayStation 4 version, the X button, you have to go all the way up to the R2 button to get that third jump, which just doesn't feel right when you've played collectathon platformers and every jump is mapped to one simple button. Before people start screaming at me, but Banjo wasn't. Well, Banjo is one of those odd examples, but most of the time everything is on that single button, and that's how you jump. That's just the way that control is mapped out. Another gripe that I have with it is you have to disengage the slide. What do you mean by that, Drak? You actually have to press R2 again to disengage it, which in turn gives you like an extra inch, but if you're already at the edge of a platform, this has happened to me a few times, you will fall off the platform, flipping back up so that you're back in normal stance, which at that point gets you killed and therefore is a frustration. So, that's one of my biggest gripes on this is you could have fixed that jumping mechanic to make it flow a little bit more. And the fact that you had to disengage the third jump is weird as far as I'm concerned, and it could have been fixed in development. The other problem that I do have with gameplay, a lot of people might say, well, that's a bit of a gripe. The other problem that I have is there be glitches in this game, and they are, at least in my playthrough, plenty. So much so that I actually came across a glitch. I couldn't find it online, but during a boss fight, I got knocked behind an element in the room and couldn't get out, and basically just had to endure every bit of damage that this boss had for me until it killed me and reset the boss entirely, which was really stupid, because if you have something as flawed as that, you need to take that to the development floor. That's one of those things where I can't help but wonder if probably not just a console glitch. I have a feeling somebody's experienced it on the Steam version too. And that's a fatal flaw as far as I'm concerned. We had glitches like that. We had glitches in some of the mini games that actually you have to go through in the worlds that you go through. In particular, another one that bothered me was, and a lot of this is based on the fact that they had some really great ideas on paper, but then when they implemented them, they didn't work out so well. Perfect example, there's eventually a level where you actually have to lead a parade. Well, when they actually tried to implement this later in a rogue timepiece level, they didn't consider the fact that sometimes in order to get further in that level, you're going to have to do multiple attempts. Only problem is that you have a parade following you. And if you touch the parade, you get damaged and thrown back. So already this is basically encouraging you to do a perfect run so that you don't have to deal with the parade itself, which is going to throw you off. It's going to kill you. So that doesn't really work. I mean, a lot of these ideas are really good on paper, but then when they're implemented, they don't work out so well. So I did take points off and quite a bit for gameplay. There's a lot of work that needs to be done with Hat in Time's gameplay. Moving on into audio, this is a 50-50 deal because the voice cast in Hat in Time is actually pretty damn good. I can tell that there are a couple of newcomers as well as maybe some more established voices. Not necessarily like AAA voices, but voices you've heard before that are taking on this project because they love it. The voiceover is really good in this game, and actually each character is played out really well and in the best way possible that they can for what they're trying to do there. The flaw of Hat in Time, though, is the music. The music is good. I'm not necessarily saying it isn't good. It's just not memorable. It's another game where the music is bland and forgettable. And while the characters are memorable, the characters you don't forget, in fact, you kind of laugh at them when you think about them, the music is not something you take with you out of the game. So at that point, I did take points off for audio because, while the voice cast did do a good job, the music could have been worked on and could have been a lot more memorable. Moving on into replay value and presentation. So, since it is a collectathon platform, you already know that I'm going to say it has replay value. It's actually a fairly short game considering some of the other platformers that have come out this year, but there are timepieces that you can skip. You don't necessarily need to take care of them. Like I just explained earlier in gameplay, there's this element called rogue timepieces where basically if you find the rogue timepiece in a level that you've done before, you go into... The best way I know how to describe it is the bonus levels in Super Mario Sunshine, where the jetpack gets taken away from you. So at that point, you have those rogue time pieces. Sometimes you can go into branching paths on levels and go and get the time pieces later, and that's still worth it, and it's still worth the replay value for it. The good thing is, so I can say that this game has replay value. The other thing that helps it is its length. It's not a huge slog like, say, a Banjo-Tooie or something like that. It's actually fairly short, and because of that, it actually lends a strength to this in a weird way. So yes, there is replay value. Presentation, does it come together? Yeah, it does. I gotta say, even though with a lot of its flaws, it does actually come together to have a cute little piece in gaming that you can turn on from time to time and still get enjoyment from, at least a little bit. There are going to be gripes you have, and there are going to be a little annoyances, but it's still enjoyable in the long run, which is why I have no problem giving Hat in Time a 7 out of 10. It is a solid C effort. I can see that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. This is a first entry for them, and I see that there's a lot of rough edges that they still need to iron out, but I have heard that this game did fairly well. Obviously, it did well in its Kickstarter to be able to earn console ports, and I do know that it's gotten a considerable amount of popularity since it came out, especially for consoles. So I have a feeling like we might see something along the lines of Hat in Time 2, and at that point, that's where these rough edges need to be polished out. So it's a solid C effort, and I applaud Gears for Breakfast for being able to do that. But is it worth it? Currently, Hat in Time can be purchased for Steam, for Windows, for Xbox One, and for PlayStation 4, and it is all available for $29.99 US. Is it worth it at that price? This is where I have to disappoint some people. No, it's not. As fun as it is, it's not worth $30 in my mind. Honestly, if it came $10 cheaper, I'd be a little bit more on board with it, and I wouldn't have so much problems with it. But considering the fact that I just spent $30 on a game that is kind of a C effort, it doesn't really work out so well in my case. If you can get this for $19.99, either on a Steam sale or on a PlayStation Network sale, do so. It is way more worth it at $20 in my opinion than it is for $30. And that's going to go ahead and do it for this review. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys so much for your love, patience, and support as I go through this review process. And of course, I'll be back in time for the next review.